2, 1. We are live. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out to the Educational Freedom Institute podcast. We have a very special guest today. Of course, we have co-founder of the Educational Freedom Institute, Matthew Nielsen, and myself, Corey DeAngelis, Executive Director at the Educational Freedom Institute. But today we also have Andy Pollack, who is a staunch school safety advocate in the United States and a co-author of a recent book with one of our friends, actually, Max Eden. This book called Why Meadow Died, The People and Policies That Created the Parkland Shooter and Endangers America's Students. I recommend everybody go check that out. But Andy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me on. And it's always my pleasure where I could, help educate parents into what's going on in the education system. So thanks for having me, and let's educate some parents.
Yes. Cool. So for our listeners, could you just give us a brief recap for people who are unfamiliar with your background and how you got into the education debate recently? Another thing for the listeners, Andy was also one of the main speakers at the Republican National Convention earlier this year as well. But yeah, could you give us some of that background and information as to why you're such a big advocate for school safety?
Sure. Well, I never was into politics or advocating anything until what happened to me February 14th of 2018. My beautiful daughter Meadow was murdered in Parkland High School in Broward County. But after that happened, my life, my family's life's never been the same. It's something you just have to learn to live with, losing a child. I hate saying losing because I didn't lose her. She was murdered. I got to correct myself. So after that happened, I wanted to know how it could happen, like what was going on, if there was anything going on at the school. What happened? How could I let my daughter go to a school and then never see her again? Most people jumped. 97% of the people jumped on blaming the gun, going after our Second Amendment rights. And I would have if that was the truth of what happened, the facts. I just didn't want to listen to anyone. I did my own investigation with a friend of yours, Max Eden, from the Manhattan Institute. He had met me down in Parkland, and when he came and interviewed me, I started showing Max all these people that were reaching out to me about the killer, they knew he was going to be the killer. He threatened to rape students. He threatened to kill students. And so Max started looking into these allegations, and they were true. And he was just going to write an article about it, but there was so many failures and policies that we had to look into that it became a book. And I urge every parent to go out and read it, Why Meadow Died. It really shows the truth of what happened in Parkland. And I talk about these policies in the public school system that were pioneered in Broward County from a superintendent that came from Chicago, from the public school system of Chicago, linked to Arnie Duncan, then President Obama. And he pioneered these type of policies in Broward they called it restorative justice, end the school to prison pipeline. And this is just through my investigation, I found this out, that while this murderer was in school, all students were allowed in the public school system at least 4 misdemeanors per school year without ever getting introduced to law enforcement or having any repercussions. So they could assault a teacher, they could sell drugs, assault another student, steal an iPhone, and never have, they put them in a healing circle, in a program where they'd watch videos, and they try and educate them through it, watching videos and putting them in healing circles. And this doesn't work, which we found out in Parkland, and across the whole country, how teachers are getting assaulted more than ever right now. It's an epidemic that's going on in the country of teachers getting assaulted. And this is what happens when you introduce these type of policies of not holding children accountable. And that's what one of the things I found out through this policies, and President Trump, when I brought this to his attention, he actually listened and he opened up a federal school safety commission where he looked into these policies and he rescinded them because they hurt children. They set children up, regardless of color, up for failure. Okay, that's what it does in the public school system. And I'm happy to say thousands of parents have realized this in Broward County and removed their children from the public school system. Thousands. And what's interesting, which a lot of people don't know this, in Broward County, there's school districts running at 35% capacity. And they won't close them because they know right behind that is a charter school that wants to open up where there's a failing public school, and then they would lose thousands more to the charter school system. And parents don't know that, and it's monopoly money to these school districts to keep a failing school open. It's not their money, and they'll keep it no matter whatever it costs them, regardless of their occupancy. They don't close these schools because the threat of a charter school taking it over and then losing thousands more. They don't close them, and most parents don't realize that.
Yeah, what's interesting to me is when you ask parents that are using charter schools or private school choice programs why they choose one particular school over another, they list things like academics, but when you rank order these things, safety is consistently at the top of the list. So families are really seeking out these types of alternatives, I think, because of the different cultures at the school, but then also different safety policies and discipline policies at the schools as well. I think in Florida, there's also a school choice program that's particularly for students who do not feel safe in the public school system. I believe it's called the Hope Scholarship Program. So what are your thoughts on these kinds of programs like the Hope Scholarship Program as an alternative to the public schools when it comes to safety? And then are there other types of initiatives that you support to make the traditional public schools safer as well? What are your thoughts on both?
Competition breeds excellence. And I think that, I witnessed it with these public schools, who's running them. I really don't agree with most of the people running these public schools and their teachers unions. But that's one of the reasons Governor DeSantis won in Florida. Okay. Thousands of African Americans voted for DeSantis because of that pro-choice. No parent should be forced to send their child to a failing public school. They should have the choice for charter school, or private, or I'm for all getting tax credits and going to whatever school you want. And why it means so much to me, and you'll know more about this. I'm not an expert in education policy, but a thing that bothers me with the public schools and charter schools, tell me if I'm saying something right, or you could help educate me. With the public schools, they take these kids that are emotionally disturbed, oppositional defiant disorder, they diagnose them with, and they put them in and they label them special needs, and they're violent, these children, and parents don't know this in the public school systems. They think of special needs as dyslexia, cerebral palsy, some type of learning disability, but they wouldn't think that a kid violent and emotionally disturbed is in the school with his children, with their children, but it's the truth. The murderer had that at my school, at my daughter's school, and it almost makes them untouchable in the public school system. And when I was speaking with a teacher, because I put my software in one of the big charter schools in Florida, and I asked her, and they say they have a way. It's easier for them to get rid of a student diagnosed with that than it is a public school. And maybe you could tell me what's your thoughts on that, and maybe you could talk to your listeners about that oppositional defiant disorder, how these children diagnosed with that are in the public school system mingling with your children, and they're seriously violent.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was mentioned in your book with Max Eden was that the disparate impact or disparities of between different categories of students, and trying to close those disparities could lead to unintended consequences because one of those groups it happens to be students that are classified as having a special need. But one of the main quotes from your book was that when it comes to students that are classified because of behavioral issues, the logic of this is to punish or discipline students that are misbehaving at the same rate as students that are not misbehaving, which makes no sense at all. And another thing in the traditional public school sector, which could also be the case in other sectors as well, is that schools have a financial incentive of classifying students as having a special need because they get more money in many states if the student is classified as having a special need. So this could be one of those unintended consequences of many of these policies interacting with one another.
And in some cases, a lot more funding.
In Sarasota County, it just came out because my friend is a school board member there, Bridget Ziegler. It just came out that they were taking kids that were failing in the public schools and labeling them special needs. And, they were just failing students that had learning disabilities, and they shouldn't have been. And they put them in special needs and collected all that money and got them graduated, putting them through these programs. And they actually just got in trouble. The Department of Education is all over them in Sarasota County. So parents, I'm very biased towards public schools now after I saw what happened to me. And parents they're always writing me, telling me about incidents in public schools. And you know what? I don't even want to hear it anymore when parents write me about the public schools, because between my book and everywhere I've been, I tell parents I would sell my kidney to be able to afford to put my child in alternative school, homeschool, charter school, private school, anything to get him out of that. It's, most likely your child's not going to get murdered like my daughter, but you're subjecting them to an unsafe environment with these type of emotionally disturbed children, with children being able to commit multiple misdemeanors in school without any repercussions. And even in Broward, after my daughter was murdered and we came out with all these findings, the president did a commission. Governor Scott at the time opened the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Commission to look into the failures. And all these failures came out, but yet in Broward, where these bureaucrats, these unethical bureaucrats are running the school district with a $4.8 billion budget, they still practice these policies, if you can believe it. And there's no get through to them. So the only way to get through to these people is get through to the parents. And that's why I support you with your charter schools with this alternative learning, for children. It's so important to have them.
Yeah, and I think what you said earlier was correct, that charter schools and private schools in general have more flexibility over their discipline standards in their schools and just their overall how they run their schools. They have more flexibility to create the environments that lead to better school cultures, which could lead to a reduction in safety issues in their schools. I want to ask you a couple of things that the other side might say against this, and what your response is. So, for example, the other side might just say, "Well, Andy, if we just ban guns, this will fix the problem." That's one thing that is said by the other side, and then the other thing is, well, our public schools aren't unsafe because of the policies. It's not because of the culture of the schools and because people don't choose to be there. And it's not because that, the environment isn't conducive to learning. It's because they just don't have enough money. We just need to spend $50,000 per child per year in the public school system, and then it'll just magically be safe. So what are your responses to those two?
I'll answer the second one first because it's fresher in my brain. So Broward County, $4.8 billion budget. But what happens is with these school districts, I don't, half of these, like the school board, I'm not saying every school board member, but where is their credentials that they know how to run a $4.8 billion budget? Just because you're popular and you're a member of the school board, where is your credentials that you know how to budget a business of $4.8 billion, like in Broward? It's so mismanaged. You couldn't believe it, man. That's how mismanaged it is in Broward County, with their budgets, with their construction. You got a superintendent who's never ran a business in his life. Okay, now you're gonna put him in charge, and then a school board that never ran. They couldn't run a lemonade shop, half of them. And I'm not making fun of lemonade stands, but that's the problem. You know what I'm saying? Would you hire one of these school board members who's getting whatever they make, $30,000? I don't know what they make, to run a $4.8 billion company? If you had a company that was bringing in $4.8 billion in sales, would you just want some nice person from a community, just run? Oh, she's nice, let's just pick her. She makes, and pay her $30,000 to run your company. And that's what, that's what goes on in the public schools. What I've seen, I can't speak for all of them, but I would imagine that most of these school board members have no business background. And the same thing as these superintendents, it's monopoly money to them. Oh, we'll just build, they're not capable. I don't think so. What do you think? You know more about what's going on. I'm only familiar with Broward.
I think there's two other things that come to mind. Is that one is that they might not have an incentive to spend the money wisely. They might it might be a competency thing for one, but secondly, it could be that if you don't have school choice, well, then the public schools might not have a particularly strong incentive to spend that money on making the school a really great place. They may spend it on administrative bloat and just getting more jobs for people instead of solving the root of the problem. So you can throw more money into a system, but if it doesn't have strong incentives to spend that money wisely, you shouldn't expect different results. And then my other thing is the regulation thing. It could be that the public schools just have so much regulations that even if they're well-meaning, and even if they're smart, and even if they have enough money, they may not be able to. They may have their hands tied. They may not be able to make the decisions that they would like in order to improve the school too. So those are just a couple other things.
We go back to competition with charter schools. You know what I mean? If they have a competitive charter school and they're losing students, maybe they'd spend their money in the right places where it would benefit our children, rather than just wasting it on some turf field or on dirt or whatever happens on blacktop contracts, which like what went on in Broward with all the mismanaged spending. But what's sick in Broward? They just ask for more money. They just have another bond referendum and they just get another 800 million or another 25 million. I don't get it. You know what I mean? But I've witnessed it firsthand, and usually the money doesn't get allocated to where they say it's going to go. But that's why charter school and competition, it's like any business. If you open one business on one corner and you have another business on the other corner, you're going to have competition, and your business, you're going to want it looking the best. You're going to want to have the best product, and that's why charter schools are so important. Give an alternative.
So yeah, I agree. And that would back to your earlier point, Andy. You were talking about a lot of people pulling their kids out of public schools and whatnot. That's the beauty of choice, and like in Florida, where you guys have a ton of choice, families can pick a different spot, and especially with programs like the Hope Scholarship and Opportunity Scholarships, things like that, where families can take their kids somewhere else where maybe under normal circumstances they wouldn't be able to afford private school X. They can take their kid there with a scholarship. So that's a really nice thing about Florida in particular. Right. But I have a question for you. You said you had one of your schools that you've been talking to installed your software. Tell us about that. What are you working on?
It's pretty amazing. This software, schoolsafetygrant.org. I urge any person in education or law enforcement or parents. What I did was I focused after my daughter was murdered. I went I wanted to dissect all the failures, and there was a lot of failures. And I met with a company, and there was lots, but I wanted to really come up with solutions. And we addressed multiple failures and put it into a software that we're giving away to law enforcement and to educate and to schools. So what it does is it links law enforcement to a school within seconds. No matter, regardless of the camera system that the school has, the responding law enforcement could tie into those cameras within seconds. It gives them access to the door locking mechanisms. It gives them access to the PA system. So within seconds, the dispatcher could be talking to anybody in a school, telling them which way to exit or to stay in place. Or, better yet, we're working on, we could talk to the shooter. And most of the time, shooters commit suicide or surrender. So within seconds, a sheriff in the dispatch could be talking to a shooter. And another thing that we've done is we're able to silence the fire alarms. My daughter was murdered on the 3rd floor. The teacher thought it was a good idea to put my daughter in the hallway. After 90 rounds went off, deafening rounds, but she heard the fire alarm go off. So she put my daughter into the hallway where she was shot 9 times. So we addressed that in my software too. We're able to silence it from dispatch. The dispatch sees it's not a fire, it's a shooter. They're able to silence it and tell the kids and the teachers what's going on, go back into your classroom or exit through a different hallway, which is very important. Mm-hmm. Another big what we worked on is mapping. A lot of times in dispatch, when the dispatcher is looking at a monitor, they're looking at like 20 cameras on a monitor. And it's impossible to know exactly where in the building that exact camera is because, a dispatcher can't know every single building in a county. So we have a mapping system that goes along with the cameras. So if the dispatcher mouses on one camera, it blinks on another camera showing them exactly where they are in the building. So if first responders at a building, the dispatcher could tell them go down this hallway, up those steps, and pinpoint them right to that area where something's going on. And we've installed this. We're installing it throughout the country now in different schools and police departments. And not only does it shave seconds off response, but minutes. Seconds save lives, minutes save more lives. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty incredible to be a part of it. And of course, I have more success working with in the private sector and the charter schools throughout the country. Public schools are coming around, but there's a lot of bureaucracy that goes with dealing with public schools, and a lot of them don't put their children's safety on the top of the list.
Well, what's interesting is, in general, especially if we're looking at charter schools, the traditional public schools tend to get more money than the charter schools. So they have more resources to spend on this kind of stuff. My latest study with Dr. Patrick Wolf at the University of Arkansas, we looked at places all across the country, especially in major urban cities. The charter schools got about 2/3 of the amount of money per student as the traditional public schools. So do you have kind of a sense of, and I was going to ask you this, I'm glad you addressed it, that you're seeing more success with the private sector. Are you including charter schools with that too? Do you have
charter
numbers,
schools.
How much more likely in particular are the charter schools?
I don't have the statistics, but it's just like it's less bureaucracy dealing with the charter schools than some of the big public schools. But my point is, for me, I'll deal with any school. It doesn't matter. I just want the kids safer. So public schools, I'd love to deal with them. But my business philosophy is I'm going to work with these charter schools and the private schools. And then parents from the public schools are going to say, well, why is the kid safer at the charter school and the private schools? And the parents need to pressure these public schools or else it'll never happen. So really, it's all about local government governing and parents getting involved in the community. And if you want to put your child in a charter school, hey, I'm all for charter schools and for private. But public
Yeah,
school needs some pressure, but we're breaking into them.
That's a good point. That the traditional public schools can do this too, but there might just be a lot of bureaucracy. So, I mean, one of the things that could help with this, one is competition, obviously, which we've hit on, but then also on the other end of the token, sometimes even when you have competition, you can't do something even if you want to do it. I mean, so another thing that I think this could lead to is the public schools pushing for deregulation. And so they don't have as much red tape, and their hands won't be as tied going forward. But the competition kind of leads to that kind of incentive to push for that deregulation. So, hopefully going forward, we see this benefit all the sectors, private, charter, public.
Why is it that the public schools are getting more money than the charters? Like I heard you say that.
That's just the big. The teacher
good question right there.
Unions and other special interests.
Yeah, I'd like to give me the answer to that one.
And they push to defund their competition. This doesn't mean that they're evil people or anything. It's just they're trying to protect their business. And one way that they do that is to push for less funding in other sectors. And then another thing is to get these kind of laws passed for charter schools and voucher programs. Is one of the deals that is made to make it politically feasible is to give people less money if they leave the traditional public schools, to disincentivize them from leaving the traditional public schools. So it's just all politics. I think Matthew and I in particular would say a child should get the same amount of money regardless of where they're getting an education. If that's a traditional public school or a charter school or a private school, they should get at least about the same amount of money. They shouldn't be valued less just because their regular public school didn't work for them.
Mm-hmm.
And do you see, is there a difference by state with who's running the state between Republicans and Democrats?
I haven't.
Where you seeing more pushback?
I haven't looked at party, but if you look at places like if you look at DC, for example, the traditional public schools get like over $30,000 per child, and then the charters get about $20,000, so they get a third less. And you see similar trends in other big cities. At least most of the places that I've looked at happen to be, I believe, more Democratic-controlled areas. But that doesn't mean I just don't know what the Republican-controlled areas look like as far as funding disparities. Although in Texas, a couple of places that we looked at, which happened to be more red than places like DC, the funding was more equitable between the charter schools and the traditional schools. So that's some evidence that's not comprehensive.
And then you get these teachers unions who are supporting. They're definitely against the charter schools, the teachers unions, and they endorse. They get to endorse these candidates that are anti-charter school. And they're a big factor in these smaller elections, because I ran up against it in Broward. When you have a teachers union out there at every polling station, 10 of them with a card, with a voter card, putting in candidates that are anti-charter schools, because they definitely, you probably run in that across the country. You're not getting any, love from any teachers unions, right?
What's interesting here is that you bring up politics, right? Matthew and I were just talking about this earlier on a phone call, but Biden's national policy director in an interview recently said that if a charter school is underperforming, they're going to take away federal funding from charter schools. And a little bit later in the same interview, the same policy director for the Biden administration said that for underperforming traditional public schools, they just need more money. We're going to give them more money. So for charter schools that already get less money, they're going to defund them, according to the national policy director. But then for the regular public schools that already do get more money, if they're failing, it's an interesting difference in outlook.
Mm-hmm. And also, maybe you're aware about this. Joe Biden is going to reintroduce those policies that the president rescinded to end the school to prison pipeline that the president ended It's on Joe Biden's website that he's going to reintroduce those policies of, not holding kids accountable. And he might even, like, when it started, the schools got federal funding to participate. A colleague letter. Public schools got federal funding to participate in these policies with these kids, with these troubled kids. And you know what? I want anyone not to get me wrong. Every kid needs accountability regardless of color, and they need to be put in a program that works. These programs don't help these kids when you don't hold them accountable. You set them up for failure. Kids need accountability. The right programs could be in place to help them, but the way they've done it with this restorative justice programs, with these healing circles, it's just not cutting it. It doesn't work, and these kids are committing felonies when they're in their 20s because all of a sudden there's no promise program or healing circles. Now they're going to put them in, they're going to put them in jail. So, and Biden already said it. He's going to reintroduce these policies, and parents should know that. You better start looking at these options. Charter schools are a great option, and you can talk to the charter schools about these restorative justice programs that you're getting away from. Talk to the schools and see how they're going to handle it.
It's a good point. I have just one more question for you, Andy, and then I'm good. But and Corey may have more. But I have a question for you. I'm sure you've worked with legislators around the country, probably in Florida, at the state level, which is really where a lot of this comes down. The one you just mentioned, that Dear Colleague letter, obviously that's a federal thing. There are federal programs that states have to deal with, but a lot of what charter schools deal with, what the traditional public schools deal with, and a lot of their rules and regulations are determined at the state level. And I know you've talked to them, you must have. So I'm curious, for any legislators around the country that might be listening to this conversation, what would Andy Pollack tell them? They want to know about school safety. They want to do better at the legislature, where they're setting rules and regulations for all publicly funded schools, charter schools and traditional public schools in the state. What does Andy Pollack want them to know?
I would tell them that I don't even know, if they have jurisdiction over the local school boards. You know what I mean? They do, because I passed the bill in Florida, and they have to comply. So it comes down to locally, but they need to put the pressure on these school boards. They need to sit down and put the right legislation in order to hold this local school boards accountable. And that's where I see you can't do it at a federal level. You know that. No matter what the president says, they can do whatever they want locally. And so the legislators have to look into these policies. And I would say that some of these school districts shouldn't be even in charge of handling the budgets. There should be like outside audits or companies that can handle these budgets, so the money is spent properly. So Florida was very proactive in school safety after this happened, but it took a school shooting to get it done. We have law enforcement in every single school in the state of Florida. It's the law. So regardless of what a Democratic cesspool Broward County is, they can't say we're going to defund the police and remove police officers from the school. It's law in Florida. They can't do it. But I'm sure they would do it if it wasn't a law, like other states are already doing it. And if you're a parent listening, don't settle for your county removing police officers from the school. And I wouldn't even, send my child to a school without law enforcement or a guardian where they're trained to protect our children, because we just live in a crazy world. But that's a good point. It's very important for the legislators to get together and put the laws in place that hold local school districts accountable. We have a grand jury investigation going on in Florida. Still haven't got much accountability for all the failures, but their report just came out, and behold, they're unreporting crimes with their statistics. which everybody knows most public schools on the report to keep their crime, they want to get their A-rated for their school. There's no fighting, there's no bullying, there's no crimes committed, and they're under-reporting, and this was in the grand jury report. But now I want to see them hold some people accountable for falsifying records, which goes on probably nationwide.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're getting a little over the 30-minute mark, and we want to respect your time, Andy.
Let's do it again. It's not a problem. I just got some stuff to do here. I'm in town, but I really enjoy talking to both of you. Next time we could definitely do this again in another few weeks. It's not a problem. We could get you a demo. We're going to do a demo for you. I know with my software, but let's do it again in another couple of weeks.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much for giving us your time. I want to thank the audience for checking out the Educational Freedom Institute podcast. Go check out schoolsafetygrant.org. I put it into the comments so that everybody could check it out. And then also check out Max Eden's and Andy Pollack's book, Why Meadow Died, The People and Policies That Created the Parkland Shooter and Endangers America's Students. I also put that link to Amazon, the book on Amazon as well in the comments. But thank you again, Andy, for joining us. And until next time, everybody who watched, this was
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Buddies.
Have a good one.
Take care. Bye-bye.
You too.